Mikisha to the podcast, and we're going to jump right in with questions. I'll let Katie get started.
All right. So, first, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, both personally and professionally?
Sure. My name is Mikisha Nation. I'm the executive director for Teach for America. That's a role I've been in since February 2017. I'm also the mom of three amazing boys, also known as the Nation Brothers, that keep me really busy. So education is
That's a
near and dear
great
to my heart.
squad name, the Nation Brothers.
They have an Instagram and everything.
Really? Oh,
uh, But for me, education was such a transformational experience. I migrated from Jamaica to the United States, and pretty early in my journey, hit some roadblocks when I came to kindergarten. If it hadn't been for folks telling my mom, "Hey, she has to be tested," and for teachers that showed up for me and advocated for me, I wouldn't be where I am today. Because teachers told me about cool programs where I was growing up in Connecticut in the inner city in Bridgeport. I was able to kind of have the best of both worlds in terms of a rich cultural upbringing and then a rigorous academic preparation. So I love loving on teachers and thinking about how do we get more folks into the educational workforce. And then my career has worked for the last 20 years in education, community development, and kind of health equity issues for over 20 years. So really excited to talk with you guys today and just share a little bit of my knowledge.
We are excited too. Okay, so if you were to meet somebody, it could be at a dinner party, maybe you just bump into them at the store, and they asked you, "What do you do? Like, what does your day look like?" How do you describe what you do to someone that you've just met?
Each and every day, I get to think about what does it take to make sure that all students have access to an excellent education. That's the mission for Teach for America, and that might mean, like just in terms of my day last week, I got to go and celebrate our core members. So we have our brand new teachers that were in St. Paul this summer, working with Munn College Prep Academy, doing summer learning for 750 students this summer, right? And so
Wow.
insane.
5 weeks academic instruction, leadership development, school trips, and they were working alongside veteran teachers at Munn College Prep Academy, my staff, to really help support their learning and their growth. So it can mean going to visit classrooms. It can mean working on fundraising. It can mean going to a college or university campus and talking to prospective teachers, candidates, and getting them excited about what it might mean to apply to Teach for America. It also can mean fundraising, so making sure we have the resources that are required to really support our school partners and our teachers. So, on a day-to-day basis, is a little bit of everything.
Nice.
And Mikisha, as you talked about it, you've really dedicated your career to health, educational equity, and you share some of the lived experiences that many of the students TFA Twin Cities serves. So, how does that personal connection directly inform your strategies in reimagining educational excellence within the Twin Cities?
So, first and foremost, I would say how that really helps me is we stay deeply rooted in community and understanding the history and the context for which education is happening in our state. So that means understanding the lived experience of the different diverse communities that have moved to Minnesota, as well as folks that are native indigenous communities that are here, and really using that as a backdrop to understand how we do our research and our insights work on what needs to be possible for students. So because I migrated here, I can really talk to folks about what is that journey like for families as they're trying to navigate the education system. How might we not recognize as teachers how students can fall through the cracks? And
Mm,
so there's a lot of opportunities for me to bridge that gap and for us to use and leverage the expertise of families and parents to help guide that learning. Even something as simple as parent teacher conferences, right? There's this notion that you come during this particular time of the day. What do you do when your families are super busy and working different hours? And so I really just use my experience and the experience of our community to drive best practices for our teachers in ways that help them think of innovative ways to serve their students and families.
And Makisha, so spoiler alert, I am on the board for Teach for America. So that
Yeah.
has been a real just blessing for me in my just onboarding. And one of the things I appreciated was learning about some of the stats in the Twin Cities and some of the myth busting. And I even shared some with Katie. I would love for you to share because people say, well, in Twin Cities, Minnesota has great schools and education system. So can you talk about some of the differences with the children of color and like kind of can you talk through some of those things because I thought that was as I was onboarding some things that I wasn't aware of either.
Yeah, I often say that Minnesota's a tale of two states, depending on your zip code and where you grew up, depending on the demographic background, if you come from an immigrant or refugee family, if English isn't the first language spoken at home, you could have a very different set of outcomes. So the example I would give, for example, in Minnesota right now, for students of color, we as a state are either last or second to last for on-time high school graduation. That means for our Black, Latinx students, for our Indigenous students, there are a lot of other states that are doing much better than we are, and that's often something we don't think about in Minnesota. What that can mean is about 50 to 60%, depending on where you are in the Twin Cities, of students of color are actually graduating high school on time, compared to 70 to 80% of their white, more affluent peers. And so we know that this is not a gap because of the students themselves, but around the opportunities that they have access to, rigorous instruction and things that prepare them for graduating from high school for their career and for post-secondary studies. So we really want to work on changing that. Out of that number, you say about 50%, 60% graduate from high school, maybe a third will roll in post-secondary opportunities. And out of that number, maybe 11 to 12% will actually graduate with a post-secondary degree of some sort.
Mm.
We know how critical that is for families to have access to economic mobility to truly make sure we're changing that course. And so I'm really lucky I get to work with some school partners that are really trying to push that and really doing a great job specifically with diverse students.
Uh, when Courtney shared those with me, and thank you for getting to more details, yeah, it was a little bit jaw dropping because you think of Minnesota and like great public schools, and it comes back to like, is it great in access for all? Um, So, kind of building on that, in this podcast, we talk a lot about supply chains, obviously. How do you think about the supply chain of education? And so, how do you view the supply chain of that, like educational opportunity? What are some of the key leverage points where organizations like, Teach for America can create and have the most impact for students?
Yeah, one of the biggest ways that Teach for America has an impact is really thinking about the talent supply chain. And so, how are you
Hmm.
cultivating and generating that next generation of educational leaders? And for us, that means being very intentional about how we build partnerships and relationships. And so, I'd say in Minnesota, we often have folks that might be coaching or they're tutoring, or while they're in undergrad, they worked in early childhood, but no one is talking to that person about, hey, you love working with young people. You have this general affinity for motivating students, for working with families and parents. But do you know that you could have a career that would be meaningful in teaching? And so a lot of what our work is doing now is how are we building kind of robust education career pathways where we're meeting folks earlier on that journey, introducing them to the opportunity to think about teaching as a career, and then giving them an opportunity to try it on. This fall, we're going to be launching the Ignite Tutoring Fellowship, where we're going to be working with students at Perdeo Academy focused on middle school math. And we're actually going to get a chance to recruit undergraduates at college to be math tutors for a group of students. And so they're going to get real life experiences working with students on a small group basis to help re-energize their effort around thinking about education as a career pathway. And so I'm just really excited about initiatives like that that takes the interest that somebody might have, matches them with a direct opportunity to have real impact. And then what we've seen is when folks finish the Ignite Fellowship, they're 3 to 4 times more likely to apply to TFA, accept a job, and teach in the fall.
Mm.
And so I just know how that backwards mapping of the right sets of experiences to connect talent to opportunity is really critical to our work.
I have this, as you were talking, I guess, loosened up a memory from way back. And it's not just, so you're looking for like this incredible talent and you want to be selective of it, but not just anybody can be a teacher for Teach for America. I remember back in college, they recruited at our campus and it was a highly competitive program. And so you didn't just gonna walk up and be like, hey, I want to teach some kids. The interview process, the selection process, it was, and I'm glad to hear that it should be, right? But it was just very, very thorough to ensure like these kids are really getting like the best talent.
I mean, it blows
It's
my
really
mind.
important.
Oh, go ahead,
Yeah, go ahead.
Mikisha. I was gonna say, like, my mom was a teacher, and I remember, like, very vividly, like, coming out of school, like, with my engineering degree, and she had been teaching for 30 years, and we had the same salary. And I remember thinking, like, now that I get closer to it with my daughter, like it is so hard. I go tear in the classroom, and I'm just like, I can't believe they're doing this every day. And she had gone back to get her master's and rank one, all these additional things. And I almost was not embarrassed, but just kind of like, wow, what we value as a just country in terms of like education and how hard it is. And to your point, like you have to have a passion for it, like you talked about,
Mm-hmm.
Mikisha, and connection with children. And it just is that I think that was like my big eye opener. And my mom was always like, do not be a teacher. Like I think she knew that was not my ministry. But I saw what she put into it every day. And when you had to buy your own supplies, and when you're at a school that doesn't have, just it was just and that's why I wanted to be on the board. It was just really eye opening to me. And to your point, to like the criteria to do it. And, I mean, God bless teachers that people are willing to do it. Because I'm like, I don't think Katie or I could ever, and just ever. And it's just it's such a like similar to when we had Batala on. It's such like it's a mission you can't not get
Mm,
behind, right? It's just
yeah.
it's like how could you not want it, equitable education for all. So sorry, I'm on my tangent, but anyway. So
Yeah. No.
one of the things you talked about is a really ambitious goal for TFA Twin Cities to have twice as many children reach key educational milestones by 2030. So can you talk about some of the innovative strategic partnerships you're leveraging to achieve that goal? And how can community organizations like Northside Achievement Zone, NAF Twin Cities play into that success?
Yeah, so when TFA set our strategy, one of the things we looked at it was how can we accelerate learning? Because in many of the communities that we serve, it's not just a matter of getting a kid that's reading at a second grade level up to third grade. We want to start seeing learning acceleration where we're stacking rigorous academic experiences for students year after year. And in order to do that, it really requires intentionality. The other thing I love about our 2030 goal, we want to see key educational milestones. So a big one is third grade reading, making sure kids are learning to read by the time they're in kindergarten to third grade so that they get to third grade, then they're reading to learn. And so what can we do to really help accelerate that? So in that particular area, there is a Minnesota Coalition for Literacy. Minnesota Literacy Coalition, TFA, is one of the organizations in that. We've been working on making sure our new teachers get the best in practice for science-based reading, and making sure we're training them on those skills that build foundational competencies and how you actually teach reading. People often think, well, every kid learns to read. It's a very easy process. I remember learning in kindergarten, but a third of kids will learn to read without much intervention, right? Then there's a third that actually need like evidence-based practices where they're getting
Mhm.
structural exposure, specific lesson planning, ways that you're scaffolding. And then there's another third that might need a significant intervention, and that could be because they have dyslexia or neurodiversity or just a number of things where English is not their first language, so you have to think about that differently. And so
Yeah.
we do a lot of work with our teachers, both in their initial training and then their ongoing professional development to really help accelerate that. And so we've had some amazing alums in our state that have been helping with policy initiatives around literacy. And so it's really great to see some of that work come to fruition. And then for us, we really think it's important to make sure people are talking about math. When you think about,
Mm.
careers in supply chain or
Mm.
in technology, manufacturing, innovation, or how we have so many Fortune 500 companies, that computational reasoning skill is something that is a strong asset that needs to be preserved and developed. And I don't want girls or kids of color to not see themselves as the STEM type or the math type. So that's where
Yeah.
our innovation work around launching Ignite really becomes important. And then we want to make sure there's wraparound services. So we've had a partnership with the Northside Achievement Zone, for example. We want to make sure that education is not happening in isolation. Like you need those family systems and supports. You need schools that are looking at holistic learning and how they're developing the leadership of their students. And so all those things come together to make sure we have a portrait of a graduate that's well-rounded, that's academically doing well, and that has the social and emotional skills that's going to set them up for success beyond their K-12 journey.
I love it. It's so just like well-rounded and thinking about everything. Okay, so you touched about this a little bit, like, hey, you want to see girls, people of color, like we want to see that you can see a path in these fields. One of the reasons Courtney and I love to do this podcast. How do you think about that from a recruiting standpoint? A little bit back to the talent, so that your teachers are reflecting and almost like a mirror for the kids to see, like, I can also see a path there, finishing K through 12, going into college, maybe becoming a teacher, whatever that is. Any strategies that you do to help make sure that your workforce reflects like what the classroom looks like? Because I think there's a parallel here. I think for us, even in supply chain too, we're making all these goods for people all over the world. We want our people in supply chain to reflect that as well.
Yeah, that's very important to the work we're doing. Many people don't know, but across the state, about 15% of the students in Minnesota are students of color. And when you look in the Twin Cities specifically, that number could be 45 to 60%, depending on where you are and what
Hmm.
community you're in. So having representation in our teacher workforce is really important. Yet, as a state in Minnesota, only about 5 to 10% of our teacher workforce is actually diverse. Again, Twin Cities has a little bit better concentration, but one of the things that we've really done is we're not just going to the School of Education to recruit the next generation of teachers, right? We really want to make sure that we're thinking holistically about who are those student leaders on campus from diverse backgrounds, who are folks in STEM careers, majors that could be great educators. So about 25% of my core sometimes come from a math or science background,
All right.
specifically because we want to make sure we get folks that represent our teachers, our represent the backgrounds of our students that look like them. And so that's really important to our work. One of the other things we do is there's a program called Breakthrough. There's one in Minneapolis, and then there's one in the Twin Cities on the East Metro. And we have an intentional partnership nationally and locally with that organization because they recruit college students to teach in the summer. So this summer, I'm going to be going out to their career fair. Last summer, I met with like 50 of their college students that worked in the summer. And so we really look at multiple avenues. And I've usually had about a third of my core members are core members of color, but this year we're actually at 49% of my core members are actually from diverse people of color backgrounds, and which is
It's
really great to
amazing.
see because it creates some lasting ripples for our students.
It is. And I appreciate too that if you're not getting what you need from like what the maybe traditional source is, like expand. Look look beyond that. I think it's a good takeaway.
So, Makisha, this triggered me from a previous discussion. As you think about, you talked about this a little bit, like when the team digs in and you, because like we do have really good schools, what are some of the like real tactical challenges that you think from a child of color, like that they experience that creates the outcomes that we see today? Because I just would love to hear our listeners to hear more about that.
Sure. I think one of the big barriers, and we're doing a better job of this, and I think organizations like Way to Grow and a number of nonprofits is the gap starts early. People don't realize that. Access to high quality early childhood. I know this is one of the areas that NAS has also focused on is really critical. So for from some students, like Head Start or pre-K programming might happen in their school district. For others, a child might stay with a family member or have different options around early childcare. But we think if you get kids off to a right start when they're 3 and 4 years old in an environment that fosters learning curiosity, we just know that the number of words that they know by kindergarten is so much more accelerated if they
Mm,
have access to those resources. So we are very much a strong proponent of early childhood funding and things that allow families to have equitable access or starting early. The other thing I would say is just academic enrichment opportunities. You think about the summertime, and lots of kids like to have fun and explore, but not every family has the resources. I mean, I just looked at it when I was planning for the summer. I don't know about you, Courtney, and I'm like, how much does these summer
Oh,
programs
camp.
cost? So,
they are expensive.
Camp is a privilege.
yeah.
It's a privilege and it is not, it's like 9 to 3.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, you're right, because I tell Harper that I'm like, hey, there are kids that don't get to engage during the day. They're at a family member's house, or they don't like camp is something that is, especially in Minnesota, quite expensive, does not accommodate everybody's schedule. Um, and we all like have a lot of access to a lot of different things. And so yeah, I do see the like, because remember we used to do like the summer, like what was it, the Pizza Hut thing and like the book it, what was it?
Yes. Yes.
Like there's just, yeah, but no, I do, it's easy for us to be, I tell like to be privileged and blessed and forget that not everybody has the same access and experiences throughout the year and throughout the summer as well. Makisha, as you think about like what excites you most about kind of the future of education in the Twin Cities, we have 85% of our listeners are here in the Twin Cities. So how can we support TFA's mission and really, to ensure every child has equal opportunity to learn, lead, and thrive? So what can we do? And our listeners are, a lot of us are engineers or in math and science, and like if someone's like, hey, I want to support and have a, like, what would your call to action be?
My first call to action would be to make sure you know some of the local schools, both public charter schools and traditional public schools that are in your community. You'd be surprised how much you can learn by going to a school open house or even going to a school board meeting. I wish more people saw just how creative our school leaders have to be to make education work given the limited resources they have, and just your ability to show up in those spaces and places to advocate for them, especially when they're thinking about things like increasing teacher salaries or resources
Mm,
around technology. A number of our schools don't have noise canceling headphones that they might need for tutoring sessions or some of those technology needs. So that's definitely an opportunity. Also, field trips, when we were talking about academic enrichment in the summer, also during the school year. I think about incredible programs where MIA has a field trip budget that they use to bring students to see field trips. So there's a science museum. So if you're in a STEM or engineering career field, just even knowing the schools in your local community, do you need a guest reader for a day? Are you having a science fair where you need judges for the community? Would your company host a group of middle school or high school students for a company tour to come and see your headquarters or to talk with folks about the careers? The what I've seen really excite students is the ability to help them not just understand the importance of going to school and studying and doing really well in their subjects, but how does that connect to what I might want to do later in my career? And that's where the business community and your listeners can play a big role in helping to shape, because I'm doing this now, I make this and I am able to provide for my family. But what was I doing as a middle
mm.
school or a high school student to prepare me for that? And I think that's a great way for folks to give back to the community. And you don't have to have a ton of time to do that. It could be a career day speaker. It could be shadowing the principal to see what the school is like. There's lots of opportunities around that for sure.
Katie and I just spoke with their middle school girls at the
Yep.
Eureka at the U. They had such good questions. Like they
Their
were
questions were
hard,
so good. I mean,
so
they asked about
good.
tariffs.
Yeah.
I was so impressed. I was in
I
middle school
mean,
and I don't think even knew what a tariff
they were
was.
so thoughtful too. Yeah, I was like, wow, we had a really we were like, oh, like
They were
and
such good questions.
so
Yeah.
interested in what we were doing. I mean, even things like like what do we do in college? How do we pick I mean,
Hmm.
I was not that insightful in middle school. And they all stood in line. We had way more questions than we could even answer. So I do think, Makisha, it is sometimes just our time and access to
Hmm.
students, because we thought they were going to be bored out of their mind. Like, what do they want to hear from us? And they were fully engaged the whole time. It was
Whole
amazing.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that across the board, not only with our students, but with, what does it mean to recruit Generation Z folks into the workforce, into
Mm.
teaching?
Yeah.
Because they grew up in this kind of and technology was like a third language for them. So they might know English, they might speak another language, and then technology and innovation is kind of the other thing that's just been a standard for them. The way they approach questions, the way they approach exploration is really key. And I also think they're very, cost conscious of understanding the financial commitments. They've learned from previous generations about student loan debt and career access.
Mm.
And so they're very intentional at trying to make sure, is this the right fit for me? They're equally passionate about education and climate change and issues that impact justice, but they want to do that in a way that's sustainable for them and for their lifestyle and for being able to provide for their family. And so I'm seeing a lot of our teachers really come to the table with thoughtful questions about, their experience in the Corps, how that sets them up. What if they want to be a school leader? What if they want to go into medicine after? And so really being able
Mm.
to be with them on that journey as they're exploring their career options is really important to our work.
Love that. Okay. Makisha, you have worked kind of like in all the worlds, all the spaces. So you were at corporate, in Target, you've worked for both the government and for nonprofits. So you've worked in all these different environments. Can you share a little bit about how maybe each of these experiences has shaped your leadership style?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think, my early experiences being in programs. So I was a kid that went to a program called Horizons and got a chance to work. My very first job was at 14, working as an assistant teacher in that summer program.
Right.
I
Yeah.
was like scooping ice
Uh,
cream.
I was babysitting.
um,
You were like, I'm assistant teaching. Just carry on. Sorry. Wasn't ready for
no,
that.
but I love that community-based work, and I think folks should have some experience at some point in their career at like working on the ground, impacting folks in your community because it just gives you a different perspective. You meet people from all different walks of life. You kind of understand you know how you grew up, but then for supporting families where hunger is a real issue and access to
Mhm.
resources is a real issue, it makes you appreciate what you have, but also think about some of the systemic issues that we need to do better at adjusting as a society. And so I think that foundational experience for me, both as a student in those programs and then working alongside, was really helpful. And then I got a chance to work in a higher ed environment where I was helping to support students while I was in college or working in North Carolina. And I think understanding how higher ed can be this gateway to opportunity and what are the resources and supports that need to be there for students to make that transition, especially if they're a first generation college student. I think
Mhm.
that really helped me be really smart about programming and gaps and barriers that people might not see. And then I remember leaving grad school and be like, I want to go and work for the feds because they have all these grants, they're giving away money, and they don't know what they're doing, right? And I had this impression of what it would be like and what I would say was like, and I think it's important for us to especially talk about that now as people are thinking about government and big government and cuts. But my time spent in federal services was some of the most amazing points in my career because I got to zoom out and see the big picture, what was happening in North Carolina or in California or in Georgia or in Boston or Duke University, and to actually understand both the community practices, but also what was happening in research institutions to drive innovation around things like mental health, um, child welfare, children's mental health, and disaster response. And so getting the opportunity to see what are best practices being implemented across the country and then being more efficient at how are we giving out those resources and measuring and evaluating impact was something I love from my federal experiences. So those dollars were really really thoughtful to how we made stewardship decisions around who we gave funds to, and then how are we supporting their technical assistance to make sure that innovation was reaching students at all aspects of our community. And so I really appreciated that from my time. And then my time in corporate, I think I always like, well, when you're in a big company, there's lots of resources and lots of dollars. And that is true, right? But there was also this opportunity to think about what's in it for the company and what's in it for the community at the same time. So I got to work on our well-being initiative at Target and how we launched that across the company, how we use that data and insights to help drive better outcomes, not only for our team members, but also for the communities that they serve. And so that was really fascinating too, because you have to understand how to work across different departments that might have different priorities for their particular business unit. And so for each of those experiences, there's always something that I could learn on something in a way that I could grow, but also something that I could contribute to. I had the background from a public health and educational expertise to help inform that work. And then it was also great to kind of see how a major organization kind of thinks about their strategy and the double bottom line benefit to the community.
So good.
So good. I will say I was listening to Planet Money and they were interviewing one of the this is not a political rant, sorry, just gonna prep. But they were interviewing one of the guys from Doge and like he talked about why he went in there and like what he saw. And it was so interesting and it wasn't what I expected. And he did talk about like he said it was just coming from corporate, interesting to see, like to take that step back. And his takeaway was like, people are assuming that people haven't thought of it or but people were working on things, it's just slow. It was interesting to say, like, yes, there's opportunity, but there are like really good people working on really important things. And we have some structural things in place that make it take a little bit longer to get things done. But it was interesting, like podcast episode that I was curious is because like I think corporate is so far from like some of the government, like that thought. I was like, what is happening in the, like, it just feels like this big thing. So I appreciate your insights in terms of what you took away from it, because I do think having that different perspective from corporate, nonprofit, and government, I mean, just your scope and like I just you can be so broad and bring so much to all those different areas. So, but thank you for sharing that. Okay, last question. This went by so fast.
Sure. Oh my goodness.
Looking at back at your journey, and you've had, like we just talked about, very expansive background. What advice do you wish you received earlier in your career and you would pass on to the young Mikisha or the next Mikisha? What do you wish you would have known earlier?
So the first thing I would say is when you meet like leaders like Katie and Courtney, you see the pretty picture of all the things they've accomplished, right? The awards they've won, the accolades, and you're like, how do I get a plan that takes me there, right? And if we're really honest, and I try to be honest because I work with young people all the time, um, there isn't just one path to get you from A to
Mhm.
B. And actually, part of it is the beauty of that journey and of figuring it out. And so I think a lot of times as students or even as teachers, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to get it right 100% out the gate the very first time. And I would say, it's more intentional and more important for you to be intentional about what are you really good at? What do you want to learn, right? And what do you have expertise that can actually build and contribute right away? And to be really flexible in the things that you pursue with that kind of Venn diagram of like, I'm really good at this, I want to learn this, and this is what I can contribute, because it will win the day, whether you are in an analytics role or in a supply chain role or jumping from different parts to different sectors. And I don't feel like you have to have it all figured out. Everybody that gets to like where I am now, 20 plus years working, there it didn't always look like a pretty neat picture.
Mhm.
And some of that was intentional growth and development that I needed to get through. So I would say definitely don't feel like you have to have this plan mapped out for the next 10, 15 years. Be really intentional about the experiences you want, how you're learning and growing, and then follow that. And when the opportunity comes up, you'll be ready for it. The other thing I would say is take the time to invest in relationships. I know for my students that are going off to college in the fall, yes, it's going to be important to do well academically. Also, when you start in your career and you get that first kind of big girl job, you really want to do well with that job. But I remember a leader, Phil McCoy, setting me aside when I went to Target, and he was like, that's right. You're doing your job, and that's what you're supposed to do, Mikisha. How are you building relationships? How are you connecting with other people within your organization? And I think sometimes when we get in college, we get so focused on just getting that great grades, and I definitely
Yeah.
want everybody to get great grades. But it's also a time, when are you going to be around so many people your age? Like building
Mm,
relationships, learning from each other, and you never know. There are still folks that I met 20 years ago that I call up today when I'm having a problem or issue, or when I think about a leader that I want to connect with that's in another industry. And I think we underestimate the importance of the both and in our strategy of like doing really well in our profession, doing really well academically when you're in school, making sure you're really building meaningful connections and meaningful relationships. And don't be afraid to mess up. Like sometimes learning what you don't want to do by an internship that you might take, or a project that you work on where you're like, gosh, this was not my sweet spot of experiences, but you'll know that, and it helps
Mhm.
clarify where your interests lie. So those are kind of the three things I would say. Really make sure that you don't put so much pressure that you have to have the plan all figured out. Follow your interests and your abilities, and meet the right opportunity. Take the time to build and invest in relationships, and don't be afraid about failure. I've learned some of my best lessons from things that didn't work well, that then equipped me to the skills to level up my leadership for the next opportunity.
So
I guess
good.
big like mic drop, boom, like
Mm.
late, in appreciating that. And now the podcast has caused us to network in a way, but it is, I love to see younger people doing it because to your point, like that that is a piece of the job that no one tells you about, and you're just like, I was like, put your head down and work, make money, get promoted, and then you realize connections. And to your point, I talk to my Georgia Tech, we call it Georgia Tech Black Girl Magic crew all the time. and we have our Black Brick Moms crew, and then we have like, Katie and I have our chat. Like, I tell people you can't with sanity get to where you are today without having a good network of people around you to be successful.
That's especially critical for women and first generation students and students of color who often feel like networking is transactional. And so they're like, I
Yes.
don't want someone to do a favor for me. I don't want somebody. And so I was seeing that with my students that were leaving for college when I was at Breakthrough. So I'd have like a luncheon when they came back in the fall, in between break, and just talk to them about this is what everyone is doing. So you might not have access to understand that, like, hey, if I worked in technology and I was a computer science major, my dad worked in technology, there are all these doors that get open because of that generational connection. But even if you don't have that, there's still ways to cultivate
Yeah.
that, talking to your
Yeah.
career services,
Yeah.
talking to alumni. And a lot of times for women in particular and people of color, networking feels like this hard, difficult thing,
Yeah,
but
it
people
does.
want to
Yeah.
support you. They want to support you. And so
Yeah.
just making time for those relationships, and don't be afraid to ask. I always feel like the worst thing that can happen is someone says not right now, but there's usually not really a hard no, right? And so we just got to be
Yeah.
comfortable with building those relationships.
This has been amazing. And every time we talk to you, Batala, I'm like, Katie, what are we doing with our life?
I know. It's inspiring. Honestly, so inspiring.
This was amazing. And we just love hearing your story. And now people have a way to connect and support Teach for America in the Twin Cities.
Yes, and you can follow us on Instagram, TFA Twin Cities, or on LinkedIn. We have some incredible events coming up. We're going to have the former Secretary for the U.S. Department of Education, John King, here along with some of our community partners in August. But then we're also going to have a 15th anniversary celebration in September. So we'd love for folks to kind of join us for those events and support us in our efforts. And so that's a way to stay connected on some of the things that we're up to, or seeing some of our spotlights on our teachers and our school partners.
Katie and I will be there at the gala. So She's Supply
I
Chains will
know.
be
I'm so
there in full
excited.
effect. Yes, we're so excited. Thank you so much, Mikisha, for coming. We so appreciate this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.